Imagine waking up on a calm, beautiful morning in Louisiana. The date is November 20th, 1980. The water on Lake Peigneur is glass smooth, reflecting the blue sky like a mirror. It looks like the perfect day for fishing. But take a good look at this landscape, because within 3 hours, it will be completely erased from the map. A whirlpool, larger and more powerful than anything Hollywood could imagine, is about to open up right here. It will pull down a drilling rig worth $5 million. It will drag down barges, trucks, massive oak trees, and 65 acres of solid land. It will even force the ocean to flow backwards, creating the tallest waterfall the state has ever seen. But the cause of this massive destruction was not a natural disaster. It was not an explosive device. It was a simple, silent error. A 14-inch drill bit, pushed into the wrong coordinate on a map. Welcome back to Silent Error. Today, we are going to watch a lake vanish before our eyes. Before we dive into the depths, hit that like button if you want to see more stories about tiny mistakes that caused massive events. It really helps the channel grow. Now, let's uncover how a math mistake turned a lake into a vortex. To understand how you lose a 1,300-acre lake in a single afternoon, you have to look underground. Lake Peigneur was a shallow body of water near the Gulf of Mexico, barely 3 feet deep in some places. But beneath the mud lay a massive geological feature, a salt dome. Since 1919, the Diamond Crystal Salt Company had been mining this salt. Imagine a sprawling structure underground, with miles of complex tunnels, wide enough for large trucks to drive through comfortably. On the morning of the event, 55 miners were working deep below the lake bed, totally unaware of the situation above. Up on the surface, another company, Texaco, was looking for a different resource: oil. They had set up a massive drilling rig right in the middle of the lake. So, visualize this complex setup. You have miners digging for salt below and drillers digging for oil above. It sounds risky, but it had been done safely for decades. The plan was simple: do not intersect with the mine. But on November 20th, the crew on the Texaco rig was struggling. Their drill, armed with a 14-inch bit, seized up at about 1,200 feet deep. They could not pull it out. They could not push it down. It was stuck fast. They assumed they had hit a patch of hard rock. They were incorrect. This is where the silent error happens. Before drilling, engineers have to triangulate their position using local landmarks to ensure they are drilling in a safe zone. It is basic trigonometry. But the engineer in charge of plotting the coordinates made a critical calculation mistake. He used the wrong projection system for his maps. Think of it like using a flat ruler to measure a curved globe. The math simply did not align. The rig was supposed to be drilling safely away from the salt dome. Instead, due to this calculation error, they were positioned directly over one of the mine's main caverns. When the drill got stuck, the crew did not know they had just punched a hole in the roof of the mine. Now, you might think a 14-inch hole is small. If you punch a hole that size in granite, nothing happens. But salt is different. Salt dissolves in water. As the fresh water from the lake rushed into the mine through that tiny puncture, it didn't just plug the hole. It dissolved the salt around the edges, making the opening wider and wider. The tiny 14-inch puncture quickly became a gaping opening, and the lake began to pour into the earth. Back on the surface, the rig began to tilt violently. The crew realized something was terribly wrong and shouted to evacuate. They scrambled off the rig and onto shallow barges just moments before the unthinkable happened. In front of their eyes, the 150-foot-tall drilling derrick, a massive structure of steel and iron, flipped over and vanished beneath the water in seconds. But the water was not calm anymore. It was spinning. The hole at the bottom of the lake was now expanding rapidly, creating a massive whirlpool. This was not just a drain, it was a powerful vacuum for the entire region. The vortex grew so strong that it started pulling in everything. Another drilling barge? Gone. A tugboat? Gone. Even the land itself was not safe. The whirlpool began to erode the shoreline. Large chunks of earth, complete with 100-foot oak trees, snapped off and fell into the depths. A local fisherman, Léonce Viator, was out in his small aluminum boat when the water started moving. He later said it felt like a nightmare scenario. He had to drive his boat full throttle against the current just to keep from being pulled into the center. If you are enjoying this story, make sure you are subscribed. We investigate a new case every week. While the situation on the surface was terrifying, the true danger was happening 1,300 feet below. Remember the 55 miners? At 8 in the morning, the lights in the mine flickered. Then they heard a sound that echoes in your nightmares: the roar of rushing water. The mine was flooding. Protocol dictated that when the lights flash, you evacuate immediately. But the water was entering with immense pressure. The wind generated by the displacing air was strong enough to knock grown men over. They raced their diesel trucks toward the elevator shaft, wheels spinning in the rising brine. But the mine was huge. Some were miles away from the exit. When they reached the elevator, they had to wait. The lift was slow. It could only take a few men at a time. Can you imagine the tension? Standing in the dark, hearing the roar of a collapsing lake directly above your head, wondering if the next loadout will include you. Miraculously, through disciplined evacuation procedures, the elevator made its final trip just as the water began to flood the level completely. All 55 miners made it out safely, escaping the trap just moments before it filled. By noon, the lake was empty. It had all drained into the mine. But nature balances itself. Lake Peigneur was connected to the Gulf of Mexico by the Canal. Usually, the canal flows out to the ocean. But because the mine had pulled all the water down, the lake bed was now below sea level. The ocean stopped, turned around, and flowed back inland. The Atlantic Ocean poured into the empty crater of Lake Peigneur. At the point where the canal met the empty lake, it created a 150-foot waterfall, the highest waterfall ever recorded in the state of Louisiana. The pressure inside the caverns became so intense that compressed air started shooting out of the mine shafts, blowing geysers of mist and debris 400 feet into the air. When the water finally settled days later, everything had changed. The lake was no longer 3 feet deep. It was now 1,300 feet deep. It was now a saltwater lake. It remains one of the most spectacular engineering events in history. A 14-inch error is all it takes to change the world. Now, I have a challenge for you. If you watched until the end, comment the secret word Whirlpool. I want to see who the real fans are. Would you have been one of the miners or the fishermen? Let me know. This is Silent Air. See you next time.